So here we are on Bjornling's Gathering, once again running the exact same composition of Empire, but this time we are going up against a somewhat different High Elf build. Now, of course, you can see my deployment is basically the same. I do believe this is kind of an optimal deployment, where you put Volkmar in the center, you have your Grey Wizard on the sides, Empire Captain on the other flank, and they are just reinforcing the leadership of all of these units, making sure that they are basically unbreakable, or very close to it. Behind them, of course, Demigryphs ready to flex, and on the flanks, the shooting units, because with their flat trajectory, you need as good of an arc as you possibly can. Now, my opponent, though, has decided to go with a bit of an alternative build here, and this is really why I wanted to demonstrate, showcase this match. I did run several matchups with this composition, but I really did think that these two matches were the ones that kind of showed how well this composition could work, and how it can perform against different factions. Over here, we are going up against Teclis, who is a bit of an interesting pick, I suppose, but he has definitely some very, very potent spells for the High Elves. He, of course, does have the Potion of Troy, allowing him to replenish his health and give him massive damage resistance, kind of compensating for the fact that stats are otherwise garbage, and as far as combat goes. He did bring Regrowth, he brought Flock of Doom, and he brought Net of Mintok, all of which are very, very powerful spells when dealing with Empire. Regrowth, of course, that physical resist can make your units very, very tanky. Flock of Doom just melts squishy, cheap infantry, which is kind of what makes up the majority of Empire. And Net of Mintok, of course, can immobilize high-end cavalry, can immobilize flying lords, that sort of stuff, and make them incredibly vulnerable to your cavalry, to your shooting, to that sort of stuff. So definitely a very potent kind of build here with Teclis, and of course he did bring some of the side abilities such as Shield of Safari and Wild Heart for those extra power reserves and that bit of a ward save. Now my opponent's front line this time is definitely going for a lot more quality. He has brought multiple units of White Lions of Krace, but it is important to know that while their stats might appear very, very similar to the Greatswords, these guys are actually not quite on par. They have been veteran up a decent amount, and they do, of course, have martial prowess in effect right now, and that actually makes their melee attack somewhat higher than the Greatswords in raw numbers, but it's important to remember that the Greatswords do have the advantage of that bonus against infantry, which also affects their melee attack, as well as making their weapon strength a little bit better. The Greatswords also do have slightly better armor, and they do have more models. They have 90 models to the White Lions of Krace 75s. So when you compare these units, when you compare the 5 units of Greatswords to the 6 units of White Lions of Krace, given that these units are probably about the same, we've probably invested about the same into our front lines, me and my opponent, the Greatswords should most likely be able to win. They have the exact same model count as all of those units, and they do have a slight qualitative edge. Out on the flanks, I do have Sterling's Revenge on one end, of course, and Sterling Bullets ready to kind of push some fire into these guys. And the White Lions, while they do have a 30% ward save, will still struggle against that. But I do think White Lions are definitely not a bad pick against Empire, and definitely I think is something you will see fairly often. Beyond that, my opponent has brought 3 units of Lothern Seaguard with shields. Of course, you don't have to bring too much shooting against Empire, because Lothern Seaguard can just dominate Empire shooting so decisively. These guys also, of course, have a bonus against large, so while my Demigryphs are pretty powerful against them thanks to their high armor, they will still be able to definitely hit above their weight class. On the flank, my opponent does have a single unit of Spearmen, just kind of sitting in reserve, and a unit of Dragon Princes on the other end, ready to flex and try to shut me down if I attempt to flank, let's say, Demigryphs. Finally, in the back, 2 units of Illyrian Reaver Archers, who can, of course, poke at me because they outrange both my Sterling's Revenge as well as the Silver Bullets. And, of course, I have no unit that's actually capable of catching them, and it's just a problem. So the moment the match starts, I'm immediately playing a bit of aggressively, and unfortunately for me, Sterling's Revenge immediately gets spotted and is going to take some nasty fire from the Illyrian Reaver Archers. They immediately lose 4 models. Sterling's Revenge does not have the best HP pool on a per model basis. You can see they have a little over 5,000 HP for the whole unit, while Greatswords have nearly 7,000 with the same model count. I am pushing my Demigryphs forward a little bit, thinking about posturing and getting a bit of a charge into my opponent. But I decide against it, and I do pull the Demigryph Knights back. My opponent is definitely pushing Teclis forward, just trying to get a bit of a convenient sort of engage, perhaps. Unfortunately, I do overextend a little bit with my Silver Bullets, and I'm now pulling them back. They're a little quicker than the Greatsword, so it's sometimes a little difficult to coordinate when you're keeping everything together. Now, I am committing my Grey Wizard and the Captain and Volkmar all into the fray, and you might be wondering why that is. It's to just simply to soak up the charge bonus on the White Lions. White Lions have a very good charge bonus of 22. It's actually better than the Greatswords. And so if I can soak that up, my Greatswords will get their full charge bonus, my opponent will not. And as you can see, the Greatswords, where they got their charge bonus, are absolutely mincing through these White Lions. Over here, my opponent has netted my Demigryph Knights and is now charging into my Sterling's Revenge. In the meantime, I have gotten a decent Penumbral Pendulum on this Lothern Seaguard, dishing out a little bit of hurt and putting some damage into him. In the meantime, this vanilla net of a Mintok, it is not overcast, is tying down my Demigryph Knights, and my opponent is now pushing forward with some Dragon Princes. I am trying to push my Silver Bullets into position to engage, but these guys are very, very beat up. I do cast an Enfeebling Foe on the Dragon Princes, which means that right as this engagement goes down, in spite of their monstrous charge bonus, they are going to get caught by some very angry Demigryphs, and they are in for a very, very rough time. As the engagement gets prolonged, these guys are in for an absolutely terrible bit of engagement. Unfortunately, my opponent does get an overcast Flock of Doom, and that is absolutely melting my shooting units. Unfortunately for my opponent, his Dragon Princes are getting melted in the process as well, because of course Demigryph Knights are just better than Dragon Princes, and they're better than Illyrian Reaver Archers, who are now pushing in to give the Dragon Princes a chance to disengage. In the meantime, my opponent's front line is completely caved, because the Great Swords, of course, are qualitatively much superior to the White Lions, as we discussed. Over here on the right-hand flank, despite being besieged by 3 units of White Lions, as well as Spearmen, the Great Swords are holding, though certainly not winning. We do nearly drop Teclis, but he does pop his Potion of Troy, and decides to flee and escape Volkmar. In the meantime, Volkmar can commit himself against the Dragon Princes. The Dragon Princes are, of course, rather powerful, but they have now lost their HP pool has dropped below 50%, and so they have lost Martial Mastery. And when I drop Enfeebling Foe on them, they become so weak and so susceptible to damage that the Great Swords are actually able to dice through them very effectively. So you can see their melee defense is down to 3. And the Great Swords are still around and kicking, still doing a decent job. Over here, the Demigryphs are just raking in the kills, massacring these Illyrian Reavers who thought they could get away with it. And now most of my opponent's high-end troops have lost their martial prowess or martial mastery. Over here, the Great Swords are still trying to do their best. You can see I've shifted my Empire Captain over here, just trying to give these guys an opportunity. You can see that simply because their leadership is so high, these guys are sticking around to the very bitter end. I'm dropping a Grand Soulfire, trying to get a decent bombardment off, and my Demigryph Knights are plowing in, trying to get a charge in these White Lions, hopefully break them. That high morale from being so highly veteraned is definitely making these guys a pretty solid choice. Definitely making them perform rather well at just holding the line when needed. Over here on the flank, once again my opponent is engaging, and once again I'm dropping Enfeebling Foe on his Dragon Princes. And this is definitely proving to be something of a disastrous situation for my opponent, who is simply not able to get much value of his Dragon Princes. Enfeebling Foe is a very powerful spell, and this debuff is making these Dragon Princes basically pitiful. And there you can see they're getting diced up by Great Swords. Illyrian Reavers are once again pushing in to save their Dragon Prince friends, but Illyrian Reavers against Great Swords, especially without their martial mastery, are in a terrible position. Unfortunately for me, my Demigryph Knights are getting a bit beat up, and I'm wasting, I would say, in some ways, my Great Swords on these engagements out on the flanks. I've also finally started getting my Silver Bullets back into position to shoot up the Spears and Teclis. My infantry is definitely not in an ideal state of HP, but I am constantly able to cast Enfeebling Foe. I'm able to get constant value out of my Great Swords, and they are slowly but surely dicing through my opponent's troops. Unfortunately, my Demigryphs have finally gotten shut down by a mixture of fire from the Lothern Sea Guard, fighting with the White Lines of Krace, and some Teclis, I do believe, damage from the Flock of Doom, of course. Now, the Dragon Princes are finally kind of breaking apart. They're down to 5 models, less than 200 HP, and my opponent's army over on the left flank is completely breaking. My opponent is now trying to shut down the Silver Bullets with the Lothern Sea Guard. Definitely not a bad idea, because these guys are, of course, very squishy, very susceptible to that sort of stuff. But Volkmar is still around and kicking, and Volkmar is basically at full HP. He's dropping a Grand Shield of Faith, and I still have some pretty powerful units. I still have my Empire Captain in here. I still have these fairly healthy units of Great Swords. And if push comes to shove, I still do have a Grey Wizard. I still have some Great Swords over here. 44 models, 34 over there, another 15 over there. So slowly but surely I can kind of pull troops back in. These Demigryph Knights are very, very badly beat up at 4 models, Sterling's Revenge, 20, and they're all routing, and they're most likely not coming back. However, my opponent is definitely down to his last legs. Poor Teclis over here is popping another Potion of Troy, just trying to stick around. But at this point, my opponent has decided that it is an unwinnable situation and does decide to exit the game. So it's definitely a very tight fight, the Pyrrhic victory, and it was very clear in the end game. However, as you can see, the Great Swords once again won out that frontline engagement. The Volkmar and his gang of heroes definitely helped support in the front line very, very effectively. The Empire Captain raked in 36 kills this time around. I definitely made a little bit less use of the Grey Wizard. I think one of the good ideas perhaps would be to drop Volkmar in favor of Boris Todbringer and giving the Grey Wizard Pit of Shades, because that would help make him more flexible with the kind of damage he can dish out. Demigryph Knights performed an absolutely stellar job. I definitely think my micro and usage of the Sterling's Revenge and Silver Bullets left a lot to be desired, and this was probably my weakest point in this entire game. As you can see, though, Great Swords performed very well. For my opponent, as you can see, none of the White Lions performed in a comparable manner to the Great Swords. My worst unit of Great Swords performed roughly on par with his best unit of White Lions. The Lothern Sea Guard definitely raked in a lot of kills, but most of those were, of course, against the squishy shooting, and similar situation for the Illyrian Reavers. Dragon Prince's 60 kills, definitely a respectable amount, but nonetheless not quite enough, and they were definitely getting shut down very hard by the Grey Wizard's debuffs. I definitely think this is a very solid composition to field a lot of Great Swords with a little bit of shooting support, Demigryphs, some sort of lord, maybe a Boris, maybe Volkmar, but a self-sustaining lord, a Grey Wizard for the debuffs and for the raw damage, just for that flexibility of spells, and then an Empire Captain. I definitely think it was a solid Empire build to counteract what was otherwise a pretty rough matchup with the High Elves. Definitely good game to my opponents, Creed and Squirrel. They definitely thought they had pretty solid builds. It was definitely a pretty fun matchup, definitely great to try. Those were pretty close matches, and it was definitely gave me an opportunity to test this build out. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below so you can keep up with additional content. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about Total War, Warhammer 2, anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comment section below, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.